Welcome to the DNA of Purpose podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you joining me today. Welcome to the podcast, Sandra.
Hey, Rebecca, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me over.
Oh, I'm so excited for today's conversation. Now, before we dive in, I am going to give our guests a little bit of an intro spiel so they can understand why I am so excited to be interviewing you today. Now, Sandra Colhando is a trailblazer in the world of leadership and transformation. She is the co-founder of TransforMe Learning and Leadership Solutions and is also a visionary executive coach who has revolutionized the way we think about leadership development, particularly for women. Sandra's journey is one of resilience and relentless pursuit. From overcoming personal challenges to standing on the TEDx stage, she has, in every sense of the word, transformed her fears into pure purpose, which we love on this podcast. Now, in today's episode, I am overjoyed to have the opportunity to really dive deep into Sandra's story, exploring how she's empowered leaders to craft their own authentic narratives and lead with purpose in a rapidly changing world. Welcome again to the podcast, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm so excited to be here. I think your podcast on purpose is a big drive for me to come here and spread the message and bring in as much value as possible. So here I am for you.
Oh, amazing. And I know that you will do exactly that. Now, as a starting point, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests on the podcast, and it is simply this. What question are you currently asking yourself that is guiding your life or your work forwards at this particular point in time?
Whoa, that's a beautiful question, Rebecca. And it puts me in a situation when I start my life coaching sessions, I often ask, what do you want? And I often hear, but that's the most difficult question you've asked because we don't get time to think about what we want. But to your question, I think for me, what's sitting the most is what's next. What's next for me and what's next for my business? And to be fair to that question, I think there's a precursor to these two questions before we start moving into what next, because we could also be a hopping rabbit, just look at what's next and what's shiny and may not have a direction to where we need to go and how do we design our life. So for me, the two precursor questions is where are we right now, whether it's life or business. For me, where am I at my business right now? Where is my business? And the second question is, where would I like my business to be in the next 5, 10 years?
Mm.
Especially now, it's so important to ask this question with the evolving landscape and new technology and how that's integrating in everyone's lives and businesses. It's so important for every business to ask that question right now. Where do you see yourself with this new windfall that's happening with new tech? And where do you want to go? So for me, the question is, we figured out where we want to be in the next 5, 10 years. It's now, what are the gaps and what do I need to do to take us there, take us to a space of personalization. We are in the space of leadership development and learning. So for us, it's hyper personalization and bringing in transformative training in an AI space. So for us, that's a big question right now. How do we move in that direction?
And such a beautiful question that I think really reflects the essence of what you're about, which is essentially looking at how do we evolve? How do we step into a process of transformation? And I think so much of that is really about leaning into the tension between where we're at now, what we need to become and let go of. And then from there, what do we need to lean into in order to be able to alchemize our lives into a higher potential, whether that's for us as individuals or as an organization, which you've just spoken to that. So thank you for sharing, because I think it's a beautiful setup for the journey we are about to go on across the course of the podcast. I'd,
Beautiful.
I'd love to take a step back in time. I was having a read through your biography on LinkedIn, and your journey began in India. I'm curious, what were those early years of your life like, and how did your childhood and teenage experiences shape the woman and the leader that you are today?
If my life was a movie, and if you had seen the little girl in India, you wouldn't believe the person that is standing right now in front of you. For me, my story, at least my growing up years, was a story of a scared little girl who just wanted to be invisible and hidden from the world. To have nobody know her or hear her voice. She didn't even know she had her own voice. And the backstory to that is we were born and brought up in Delhi, me and my siblings. We lost our father when we were very young, preteens. My mom was a school teacher and she was bringing up three children in rented homes with next to zero financial freedom. So she had to, have a couple of jobs, go to school in the morning, and then pick up tutoring classes till late in the evening to be able to pay the rent and bring up these three kids. So for her, it was very important to protect us because she wouldn't have time because she had to do this multiple jobs. So for us to stay at home, be quiet, it was a very crowded city and unsafe as well for young girls, at least. So that was my childhood. And when I grew through that process, for me, these words just stood for me. It was scarcity and struggle. These were and insignificance. These three were really, really big words. And for me, while I was growing up, I said, I want to get rid of all three. I didn't have big dreams to be a CEO or get $1 million. For me, is I need to get rid of scarcity in my life, get over this day-to-day struggle and uncertainty. When's the next butter coming from? And the third bit is don't want to be insignificant and hidden. And I think that was powerful. Sometimes these experiences that you want to get rid of in the moment are just the propeller you need to push you to a different stratosphere. And that's what it did for me. I was so sure. I said, I'm going to just study hard, finish my education, and be financially free. And I think seeing my mom do all that alone, for me as a woman, it never hit me that I can't do anything. I can do everything, especially when a woman needs to find a way, or if she's pushed the wall, she can definitely do anything. And for me, woman and leader became synonymous in that sense because you lead your life, right? You figure out what your challenges are, you figure out a way of getting it done amongst all the struggles, amongst, and this was like 3 decades ago. So world was very different 3 decades ago. There's been massive changes in terms of inclusion, diversity in the last 10 years. So growing up from that and struggling and getting out of that space, I feel a lot more empowered. I feel now privileged to be able to share that story, to tell those little girls who could be out there that you can be anything in this world. You can shift continents, you can run your own organizations, you can have children, you can have a loving husband, you can have a house, you can have it all in the right time.
Mm.
Um,
What I find extraordinary about your story there is, I think so many of us can spend so much time and money investing in personal development to really understand the art of reframing our thoughts in order to create a new reality. And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And yet here you were as a young girl, and you had come from quite difficult circumstances. It wasn't an easy foundation, and yet you naturally made this kind of decision. You flipped your internal dialogue, and you did that in a really organic way to fundamentally shape the reality that you're now living in. How do you think, if you were to, unpack that process, even though you did it naturally, if you were to unpack that process now, what was it that kind of allowed you to notice what wasn't serving you and to, with such a powerful intention, recreate that inner narrative to be able to bring forth a new life?
yeah. That's a good question. And when I did this, I didn't have anything planned. It was all organic. And if I were to sit and look back in life, for me at that point, my biggest teacher or my biggest friend was frustration. And therefore I say, when you are frustrated, this can be your biggest gift if you allow it to be, because frustration can also lead you to the end of the cliff, and then you can fall off and feel as if you're sinking and there's no way out. But just before that, if you are in the space of frustration, collect that energy. For me, I said, this is not my life. I don't want to be growing up. I don't want to be what my mom is doing, struggling from early morning to late in the night and still not having the financial freedom. For me, that was very clear. That vision was very clear. I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know what I wanted to become. But I said, I don't want that. And I want a financially free life. So my want was really strong. And now we look at vision boards and creating your purpose, and that's important to do. But for me, it was very simple. I want that and I don't want this. And whatever it takes me, I'm going to go get it done and find my way. So yes, I muddled my way. I picked up different roles. I struggled in those roles. I lost myself. And that's where my purpose story comes in. Who am I? I was in my 30s. I was working. I was earning. But I had no idea who I was. No idea. Just following the rules. And that was the second frustration point for me that led me to where I am today. But the first was very clear. This is what I want, and I'm going to figure out my way to get it.
I love that, Sandra. And it just speaks to the power of certainty when, when you make a decision and you truly show up for that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, in your bio, you also mentioned something else, and you just referenced it about 2 seconds ago. And that was that it actually took you years to discover your mission. Yet, only 6 years ago, you delivered a TED Talk focused on how one might go about finding their life purpose. Now, this is a subject that both you and I are passionate about. So I have two questions here. When you reflect on the unfolding of your own purpose, was there a particular turning point or moment where everything aligned and your purpose all of a sudden became clear? And if so, can you tell me a little bit more about why that chapter was significant in your life?
Sure. Before I do that, I do want to explain this a little bit. Is there is a certain time in life where you can have the luxury of talking about purpose. If you had asked the 16-year-old or 18-year-old me or 20-year-old me in my life, what's your purpose? That was not important for me at all. For me, it was bread, butter, financial freedom, Maslow's hierarchy, the bottom. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted a roof over my head and money. I didn't care about purpose at that time. But around my 30s, and that's when the first 10 years when I started working, my first company was a company called GE. I was fortunate to be in that company because that kind of taught me everything about professionalism, and that helped me grow really fast. So I just grew the corporate ladder really quick, following directions, following what leaders wanted me to do. But by age 30, I felt burnt out. And I asked myself this question, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And I had zero answer. And I was uncomfortable with it because my younger self was very clear what she wanted. I wanted financial freedom and I wanted to get out of it. My 30-year-old self, who had the financial freedom, who had the house, who had a loving partner, who had at least one daughter by then, had no answer. And I started feeling miserable, and my frustration led to depression. And I was never depressed when I was a kid with nothing in. So that's when I said, you know what, there's something wrong because you've got everything, at least what you wanted as an 18-year-old, and yet you're not happy. And that's when the concept of happy hit me. I'm like, what is happiness then? I've never went after happiness. And so what drives happiness? And so it took me a couple of years, 2, 3 years. And for me, everything, my life and entity evolved around work because that gave my initial purpose of financial freedom. And my work wasn't, and I tried different roles and I was not getting that happiness, a sense of satisfaction. And that's when I started questioning everything. So I was growing 10 years, and then I figured out that, so obviously there was something good that was growing. And then I came into a space that's a frustration pit. I fell off the cliff and I said, I'm good for nothing. I have no talents. I don't know what I'm going to do for the next 30 years. I have no purpose. I have no mission. I have no road to go. And I cannot do this day in and day out what I'm doing at work. And that's when, at that time, my husband was in the space of learning and development and Gatik, Georgia. And he kind of said that, why don't you get a life coach for yourself? And I'd never heard of life coaching at that moment. And I went through this process of life coaching. And this was a catalyst moment for me. So I was sitting in that training program. And sometimes these training programs can have this magical effect. You could be sitting there for something else, but because it helps you open up and discover and reflect, you start connecting the dots. It's not that one fine day in that room, I got all my talents. In that room, I got a clearer perspective. I saw all the dots. In that room that day, I realized I had these talents, which I completely ignored. People will come to me in my cabin or where I would sit and talk to me about their problems. They won't even know my name at work, but they said, we feel like talking to you. I've had people at work who'd come to me, said, I was planning to commit suicide the next week, but when I started talking to you, things start getting better and things are falling in place. And this was in my work, which I was frustrated at that time. And so when all these dots connected, I said, hey, there is a purpose I enjoy. I enjoy speaking with people. I enjoy peeling the onion with them, helping them find their path. And that's what took me in the space of life coaching and discovering what that means for me personally and what that means for me to start sharing that in the world. And that's kind of led to the birth of TransforMe, our first company in life coaching, leadership coaching.
Yeah. I love your story because I think so, so many people, it might not be, they might not go on the exact same journey that you went on, but your story really speaks to this idea that so many of us, come into our careers and can even spend the greater part of our career kind of climbing up the ladders, and we're focusing on everything that is external to ourselves. So, the promotion or how much money I'm making, or, we tick off the boxes that we deem to lead us towards a successful quote unquote life. But the focus that entire time is always external, where actually, if purpose is who we are, if purpose is our DNA, it actually requires us to look within before we can express our ripple of impact to the greater world. And, I think that's where the work that you're now doing today is really zoned in on how do we look within in order to be able to turn our skills, our talents, our wisdom inside out so that we can then lean into service. And, in this sense, purpose is an inside job. It always starts there.
Yeah. I love it. I love that you use some of the words we use quite often. The mistake that we use is we run after external validation,
Yes.
which is so right in terms of your salary, job, your exposure, etc., etc. But what we should be running after is inside validation. That's where purpose is, and we do talk a lot about inside out. So I was so focused on outside in, I missed the inside out approach, and I was just heading towards a very, very empty life, which I started feeling very early on. So yeah, inside is what I would doubling here.
Amazing. And just because I'm curious, do you have a process that you use to help people to start to go on that purpose journey?
Yeah. For me, I often do this in my life coaching session. So when leaders come in and say they've accomplished certain areas and they want to figure out what's next or how do they fulfill their lives. So I do a self-discovery session. It's more around helping them understand and self-reflect what are their values and natural gifts and talents first before taking them to purpose. Because, I could have a purpose of, say, having focusing on sustainability, for example, and what we should be doing. But I may not have any natural talents in that space or even values that could be really aligned to it because it's a good thing and I feel for it, but my natural tendencies don't go towards it, will not take me too far. So when I do this exercise, it's more about first understanding what your values are. And the question that I usually ask is I kind of link it just to get them out of their frame. The question I ask, these are my exact 3 questions I do in a life coaching session. Number 1, I ask them, what's their favorite animal? And while I do that, just think of an animal that comes for you also to Rebecca. What's your favorite animal? And think of 5 qualities of that animal that you aspire to have, or you truly respect, or you really appreciate about them. So if
I
you
already
can.
love this exercise, by the way. So the animal that came through for me is the horse. For a few reasons, I grew up with horses, but
Mhm.
in speaking to your questions, I think there is like a freedom and a sovereignty and strength, but also a speed and agility. It's sort of more than one thing, and there's a grace about the horse.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if I were to tell you freedom, agility, strength, and sovereignty are your values, what do you think about that?
Oh, I love what a quick way to cut through to values, because what I'm going to share with you is despite my work in the purpose space, I have struggled with the values piece. And I've gone through all of these exercises where you get like a list of 1,000 values and, you're trying to refine the list. And I end up giving up. I'm like, that's too hard. But you have got out of me what I've been trying to get out of myself in literally 30 seconds. So I love that exercise.
Beautiful. And that's the magic of, just getting you out of your cognitive and just going a little deeper and ask a question that's completely unrelated to a
Yeah.
conversation. But actually, it goes into your subconscious and pulls what you really value the most. So I love the horse as well, but I have different qualities for the horse.
Yeah.
You, because we are 2 different people and we have different values. For you, freedom is more important. For you, the speed, the agility, the sovereignty is more important. So those are things that align to you. So I ask you to park that in one basket. That's the step towards your life. The second question I would ask you is, what are the 3 or 4 things that people have said to you in the past, say 3, 4 years, that they admire about you, and that you do it so easily, and that you're in a flow state, and that I wish, Rebecca, I could do it like you.
Mm. Yeah, for me, the one I hear quite often with clients is actually around insight. It's that whole thing of how did you know that about me? Where
Mm.
for me, I'm like, well, this is what I do. But for them, they can be quite mind blown about certain observations I will have or insights or intuitions really about people. So I think that's probably one of the most common things that is shared with me.
Yeah, yeah. So intuition is your natural gift and talent.
Mm.
If I were to ask you, uh, and let me just take you to the third question, and then we stitch this whole thing together. So you've got your values here. You've got intuition as your natural gift and talent. The third question I'd like to ask you is, what is the one thing that you could do to contribute towards making a world a better place in your current lifetime?
Well, I have to say, I feel lucky enough that I get to do it, but a huge part of what I do, whether it be through my consulting work or through this podcast, is essentially helping people to get clear on their own purpose and to be able to amplify that purpose in the world. But the other part about that is actually around translating new ideas. And I do that across every aspect of my work, whether that's me speaking or me helping other people with their speaking brands. It's around how do we take something that is on the cutting edge and translate that in a human way that can actually help move the dial forward.
Yeah, and for me, that also connects to purpose, because while you're helping people translate what's new, they're able to connect the dots and connections or share
Mm.
their purpose to the world. So now, when we stitch these 3 things together, you have such a beautiful life purpose, Rebecca. You have a purpose of building an entire community of helping people discover their purpose and live their life to the fullest self.
Mm.
And how do you do it is through intuition, through working with people. That's your natural gifts and talents. And you bring in your values of agility, your speed, your sovereignty, your grace, what the horse brings in. And when you're doing all of this together, you're living your fullest life. You're living a life that unleashes your potential. And no matter what happens, because if you're running a business, you'll go up and down, there'll be good times and bad times. you'll be able to go through the bad times because you have such a strong purpose that's carrying you with your values and natural gifts and talents. So this is a little exercise I do in my coaching sessions to help people discover their purpose.
I absolutely love that. I'm absolutely blown away around how quickly you have done that. And I would certainly recommend, if any of our listeners are driving, bookmark this conversation and wait until you're sat at home with a cup of tea and a notepad and go through that process. Because I can say, as someone who's interviewed like over 130 people now about purpose, that was probably the most quickest and the most efficient method that I have seen someone deliver on this podcast. Thank you.
I'm glad. I'm glad I'm getting to do one of my purposes is to help people find that as quick as possible.
I love that. Well, I guess now would be a good time to ask more about your purpose. I would really love to hear more about your work as the co-founder of TransforMe.
Yeah. So, and I think this is a great question, segues to what we are discussing about. So when that process happened for me about discovering my purpose, and I said, life coaching is my calling, but how do I take that to the world? Both me and my husband, Gatik, at that time were going through this journey. So I was going through this journey here with a life coach. Gatik had gone through a very transformational program in the US, where he had gone through his own life, kind of designed his own life, and also figured out what he wanted to do in life. And what was beautiful is we both of us had something similar to offer, is to take these transformation that we were going through. We had just started this process to take it to the world. And one way we said we'll do it is we'll open something called TransforMe, because for us, Inside Out really, really impacted at that moment. And we said transformation has to happen for me and has to start for themselves. And so how can we take this for professionals and bring transformation in the work they do, starting with who they are, what's their purpose, how do they link their purpose to work, and bring that. When we started this about 12 and a half years ago, there wasn't too many transformation leadership programs running. There were a few, but not many. There were a lot of training programs that were for professional skills, skill building, teaching you how to, say, present or speak or communicate, but very little to do inside out. And so when we started this process, we said, Gatik, both of us, we need to do a lot for ourselves because we just started transformation. We just started walking on the path. I'm sure it's going to be up and down. So we collected a lot of skills. We studied from some of the best mentors around the world. We picked up neuroscience from UK, Gestalt therapy from Israel, social emotional intelligence from Australia at that time, and a lot of deep lab-based work from India and Australia. And we kind of collected these methodologies and we put them in professional training programs. So if you see our mission when we started off, and we famously call this the dining table conversation. So TransforMe was born on the dining table. We had this conversation. Our mission was to transform 1 million lives, start from there, bring transformation in workspaces. And we built this program that started with Inside Out. So all of our programs are designed with first working on inside. So even if it's, say, for example, storytelling skills or courageous presence, so how do you build your brand or network? We don't start with how you stand up and speak. We talk about what's stopping you, what's your blocks. We use a little bit of CBT, Gestalt therapy to help people unblock the barriers, because everyone sitting in that room has the same objectives. Just be, say, for example, a confident public speaker or storyteller or a great leader. But each one of us is uniquely sitting with our own barriers. And if you're not able to address our unique barriers, we won't be able to reach that level. So we started doing some of that work, and we experimented a lot. The first few years, we just experimented. And we were blessed to have a lot of these tech organizations at that time. So we had Accenture as a first client. Then we had Ericsson, Google. They had come up and approached, and word started spreading. We, in the first 7 years, became one of the top leadership development firms in India. And we said, my favorite question, what's next? What's next? What should we do? And at that time, we were competing with a lot of American leadership firms in India. And Karthik and I asked ourselves, what? there is no Indian firm that's gone out and established itself. Let's be the first Indian leadership development company to go and establish it outside. And I've always had a special love for Australia. People ask me, why Australia? Why not any other world? But I said, that's a personal mission. It's my personal love. I love this country. And so we came here in 2018 and set up TransforMe here. And since then, we've been doing this kind of beautiful work across the globe with our group of facilitators and coaches, focusing on bringing people together, collaborating inside out, bringing the authentic leadership styles and making a difference to work. Yeah.
I love it. And look, I love from what you shared then, the integration of different forms of intelligence. You know, you just spoke about Gestalt therapy and really helping people to, I guess, understand the more unconscious aspects of what can stop them from stepping through into a higher potential. And I think so often we can try and address these things intellectually, but they run so much, there's so much more to what it means to be human than just how we traditionally think. That's one very important aspect. But I love that you kind of have taken a more holistic approach, but then also translated it in corporate environments.
Yeah, yeah. We felt it was easy for us to do it because that's all we knew ourselves as professionals for. Like I said, most of my life was about who I was as a professional. And so for us, it was very easy to get into that space because we understood those challenges. I was going through those challenges. I couldn't find my purpose at work. I was not doing my best. Even though you put me as an A category, I felt I wasn't an A category. I could have done a lot more if I just connected to my purpose. The good news now, when you work with Gen Zs and millennials closer to Gen Zs, they already understand this. So it's a different, working with millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. But for this group of population, they understand what purpose is, and they come fully vulnerable into these conversations. For them, it makes a huge difference if they know they're making an impact in society and organization, not so much as what's the next level, what's the next designation, what's my next paycheck going to look like. It's more, what's the next exposure, what's the next level of problem we are solving. So we really enjoy working with Gen Zs because they're more inclined than us in terms of moving in this direction, I feel.
Yeah. There's a natural intelligence there that, which is great because it shows that humankind is evolving and that we're progressing. And when you take time to really sit with the younger generation and understand how they tick, there is so much to learn there, which is amazing. Sandra, for now, I want to dive back into the world of leadership, especially as the role of leaders is rapidly evolving alongside trends like AI, sustainable business models, and remote working. Now, these changes are not only redefining what it means to lead, but also driving a shift from traditional hierarchical leadership to more agile and adaptable approaches. So what I'm curious to know is, given your expertise, what key shifts have you observed in how these trends are transforming leadership?
Sure. AI right now is fairly new. So I think for AI, it's more about, we're in the beginning of the learning curve. So it's more about knowledge gathering. What will this new technology help us? How will it support us? It's more about becoming more tech savvy to be able to use this. But in terms of leadership, the focus right now, or at least in the last couple of years that I've observed, is moving towards human-centric leadership. There's a lot of talk about diversity inclusion. There's a lot of talk about authentic leadership. I love when they talk about vulnerability in leadership, understanding and connecting what employees need and their well-being. So I'm noticing, at least in the last 12 years that we've been doing this intense work with leaders, there is this massive shift towards employee well-being, in about purpose. I remember 12 years ago, if I was trying to sell a purpose workshop, nobody'd buy it.
No one would turn up.
Just teach them presentation skills or leadership skills and what their styles and how they can coach. But I would say, this is a precursor. They find the purpose, they will flourish in everything else. But anyways, now there are talks about bringing purpose in those conversations and going inside out. So I think I think organizations are realizing that with this new technology, a lot of uh, basic work could be done and could be done faster, which is whether it's data crunching or understanding the data, getting analysis, helping us with our customer experience or improve processes as well. What we need to focus right now is interpersonal collaboration, and as teams and organizations and competitions working together to be able to drive a sustainable world, to make impact on sustainability. I think that sustainability thing is not so well drawn out right now. I think it will, there's certain organizations that are far ahead in doing this kind of work. There's certain organization that's picking up. I love in Australia per se, a lot of organizations focus on giving back in whatever way. It doesn't need to be very big. So I like that even in small businesses, they've started that. Like in other regions where you see big organizations doing it, not so much the small, at least publicly. So for me, that's the shift I'm seeing, is how do we drive this human centricity, and how do we help people be more creative, innovative, because the technical skills will be taken over very soon by AI and tech.
And I definitely have some questions for you on that one a little further into the podcast. What I'm curious to know is, if we are seeing this shift towards more human-centric leadership, then what are the most essential skills or mindset shifts leaders need to embrace in order to be able to move with this evolution?
I think the first biggest adaptability. For me, COVID was a big catalyst as well, while we do this work day in and day out. But adaptability hit us during COVID because our whole business was in-person training and mostly global. So we'll be out in workshops all the time. And then when COVID hit, borders were shut down, people were not moving, and it was good 2 years, not just a few months. So we had to shift, we had to adapt. There were certain programs where we used to tell our clients we could never do virtually. Especially one program that was very people intrinsic, where we could get a dysfunctional team together for 2 days, and we use a lot of gestalt therapy, etc., to help them build trust in 2 days, where they may have had traumas with each other in the past. But for us, the mind, body, physical, all of that is important. People are in a room, so we are able to do that. And we said, virtually, I don't think we can help people connect at that level. But that changed for us. COVID gave us a nice kick in the butt and said, you have no choice, buddy. If you want to stay on, try something.
It was kind of like a catapult. Here you go.
There you go. Wake up. So we did that, and it was amazing. In fact, we had batches who had done it in person, and they said it was a lot more authentic, and we were a lot more vulnerable in a virtual setup because we felt safe. I'm like, this is interesting. So the adaptability and mindset shift is extremely, extremely important especially crucial for leaders who are taking the world forward. How do we and with the technology changing, I remember 2 years ago, I was talking about hyper-personalization training, and I wanted transformation in tech, and people said, what does that mean? Explain it. And nobody could figure that out. And now AI, after ChatGPT, everyone knows what I'm talking about. And the way it's changing in 6 months. So adaptability is number one skill. The second skill is emotional intelligence. People are not going anywhere. You still have to deal with people. And with tech, I feel that that's going to be a bigger challenge, especially when I look at my own kids who are so much into their gadgets. It's very difficult for them. For example, my daughter was coming the other day and she was on her phone in the bus, and she's like, that person was looking at me and I didn't want to look. I said, why didn't you smile and have a conversation? She's like, but then I don't know them. How will I have a conversation? And I said, what if I took away the phone from you forever? What would you do? You would have conversation from people. And so I see that struggle happening because it's so easy for us to chat on WhatsApp or on messages, but it's very difficult to walk into a room and start having those conversations and meeting with people and networking with people. So
and just essentially to be looking up, as you share the example of your daughter, and I think we've all been guilty of this. It's so easy in those spaces in between just to grab the phone and we're looking down. And in doing that, we actually miss all of those spontaneous opportunities for connection, all those little mini moments of meaning where we deeply connect with our humanity, not just as individuals, but as tribes, as communities. But when we're always looking down, our eyes aren't open to those little, sparks of magic that are available to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the little dots I was talking about, which is connection.
Yeah.
And when you get into which tech does provide a lot of advantages, I think this is what it takes away from us, is ability to connect with another human in the most natural, authentic self, to be able to see them and not just physically see them inside out, hear them. I don't know how many of us, could see somebody who's not feeling well, but have a transactional conversation like, hey, you know what? I see a different energy today. Are you okay?
Mm.
And kind of having that kind of conversation.
Yeah, which is the emotional intelligence you're talking about, though, because often your ability to perceive that can come in the form of a feeling of tuning into somebody, and you can feel that they're maybe not doing well today. And I think, I know from having spoken to you today, and I can just tell that you're somebody who's innately tuned into that. But I think that is the actual skill we're talking about when we're saying we need to develop emotional intelligence. It's essentially the ability to tap into that kind of language. I'm going to call it language of the soul, which might sound a bit woo-woo, but essentially I'm talking to the energetic frequency of being able to not only be aware of our own feelings, but to tune into the feelings of others.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's where magic happens, right? We are here on a planet for a purpose. I mean, one of the reasons why we are the most advanced species in the planet is because ability to emotionally connect with people
Mm.
and have conversations and lift each other up. And we can do it in any roles. And at the end of it, and the joy that you feel from it. So it's for yourself, not necessary for others. So that for me, that's the second most important skill. From the purpose perspective as well. And the third is resilience, because as things move fast, they tend to break also fast. There'll be a lot of ups and downs. With speed comes a lot of risk, and with speed comes a lot of bumps. You'll fall many times. There'll be a lot of failures. There'll be a lot of growth as well. So how do you pick yourself up and pick yourself up quick to be able to get on the speed back when the way the world is going, and to be able to take that on? So resilience becomes the third most critical skill for a leader as well, because we are in uncertain times. 12 years ago, we used to make 10-year plans for an organization. Now we're doing 3 years because it doesn't make sense to do 10 years. We have no idea what 10 years looks like.
Too
So
many unknown factors.
too
Yeah.
many unknown factors. I don't know what. I'm just thinking I'll be probably floating in air and, a helicopter pods, or maybe I will transport to another country and do this session. I don't know. I'm just thinking I'm getting back to the future vibes right now, but
Anything's
know.
possible. Anything's possible these days. Sandra, I want to move on to another subject that I know you're so passionate about, but I'm going to start this by sharing the fact that we connected because I'd spoken at an event and I got a beautiful LinkedIn message from you, and it was quite simple, and it was along the lines of keep shining. And it really got me thinking how wonderful it is when a woman supports another woman. And whilst we like to think it happens all of the time, I would like to see it happen far more often. And it was such a wonderful surprise to get that message from you. And you clearly walk your talk because you really are an advocate who supports the empowerment of other women. And you do that, in your work and in how you show up. I can attest to that fact. And so, in moving on to my next question, I think we're at a pivotal moment in history where women globally are rising up like never before. Yet there is still, some resistance, and the challenges that we face are very, very real. I'm wondering if you can give me some insight into what it's like for you, but also for the women that you work with in navigating the complex landscape we all find ourselves in.
Yeah, yeah. I'll come back to the keep shining part, because I feel one way for us to get over these complexes, for us women to, complement each other and to
Yeah.
keep encouraging each of us, because we anyways are born with certain gifts, and which I include imposter syndrome in. We keep questioning ourselves, and so it's nice to hear from somebody else who's doing well. But in organizations, when I work and we run this women leadership program, involved and we work with women, there are two kinds of biases that women often go through. There's the implicit and explicit. The explicit is very clear. It's happening openly, whether it's sexual harassment or unfair pay or bias in allocating certain promotions based on gender. The trick, which you can, call out and have conversations with, and with governments now, taking stand, the Australian government with unfair pay, you can still call that out and starting action. The tricky bit is the implicit biases that are happening, which is not completely called out, which is not clear, but you can clearly feel it. And there could be examples like, informal social gathering. Yes, you're not excluded from it, but can you go at 8 p.m. in the night at pub with all your male colleagues when you have little children at home, or you don't smoke, or you don't drink?
Mm.
So you're not excluded, but you're still not included. So that's one example of implicit, or having their ideas dismissed for whatever reason, or credited to men, or men explaining the ideas and getting the ideas, mansplaining, that some people say, or being denied career opportunities that they clearly qualified for. I remember I was sitting in an interview panel, and I was at that time 29 and pregnant, heavily pregnant. And we were supposed to hire somebody in a sales role in an organization. And I remember the leader, a very senior leader, he was sitting there. He looked at a profile. So, woman, she was 28 years old, married, no kids. And he's like, everything is okay, but she's 28, she's not married. So this is probably the age she's going to have her kids as well. And this is a travel role as a business development. She'll probably call maternity leave. So let's park her aside and let's find an unmarried or male. And I was sitting there, heavily pregnant organization, and I was questioning what my future was here. And so those are some, and you don't know what happens behind the room conversations, why you're hired or why you're not hired. There were two instances. I was not taken up for the next one, both my pregnancies. And both my pregnancies, I called out, said, hey, I'm so excited, but I'm pregnant, but I can still do this role.
Mm.
And I didn't get that role. And I was the only person applying for it also. And I didn't get that role, and for whatever reasons. And the reasons were not clearly explained. I was really sad. And at that time, I started questioning myself, because in my 20s, I'm having a baby. I said, maybe it's right. Maybe I won't have the time to do it. The second time it happened for another role, which had required traveling, I was really, really angry, because I already had a kid and I know my capacity. I know I can do it. And then I was not hired again for the same reason. I was really angry. And that's when, and this was the same time I was going through what's my calling, what am I meant to do, when TransforMe was born.
Mm.
And while I had a little baby, she was only 3 months, I was feeding her. I took on a part-time job because we just bootstrapped and we needed some money to run the house as well. I was running my own company. So as a new mother, breastfeeding, taking a part-time job, running her own company for the first time, I was able to do all of that just a few months before I was rejected on a job opening. So I had a very strong mission to prove that we can do it. So I think that's the implicit biases that one, women can do by proving, but second is we need to also call out and educate and have a safe space where we have this kind of conversation around these are biases that often, actually, to give credit, often men don't realize that as well. So when we
Yeah.
do,
They just don't know what they don't know, because they're not
no,
living it. Yeah.
they don't. So we do this fishbowl and we get them to speak and we get women to speak, and they're able to have these conversations and realize that they didn't mean it. And then kind of start helping each other open doors and have these conversations and have these gentle nudges, implicit biases. So yes, it's work in progress. Somebody had just shown a UN article saying it'll be 100 years for us to get equality. I look at it differently. I said, let's not look at 100 years. It's one step at a time. If my daughters or if my peers are able to have a conversation, it is still a movement, a progress. So I think this work needs to be done both by women professionals and by the organization and leaders and other genders as well to continue this journey. It's going to take some time, but it's moving in the right direction.
And I'm curious to ask you something that I have personally pondered. And it, I have found, at least in the speaking industry, looking back over, say, the last 2 decades, and it's amazing to see women rising, but there are also scenarios where we see women kind of replicating a success paradigm that's been written by men, as in this is what it looks like to succeed, as opposed to kind of holding the pen and pioneering what it is to thrive as a woman through a woman's lens. And that might actually look quite different to how men have done it. What
Yeah.
has been your experience of how women are navigating this for themselves?
Yeah, I think firstly, women fall in this double bind bias.
Yeah.
So the double bind bias is where people expect, including women, to showcase or exhibit both stereotypes, the
Mhm.
aggressiveness and assertiveness and ambition of men, the masculine traits, and the feminine traits of warmth and empathy and collaboration, etc. Now, for me, nobody's perfect. I mean, nobody can walk the fine balance all the time. There could be women who may have an alpha energy naturally to them. There could be women who have a very soft, warmth energy. So I don't
It's all
want
on a
to say
spectrum in that sense. Yeah.
spectrum. And similarly for men as well, there could be men who are warm and forthcoming and
Mm.
soft-spoken and men who are ambitious and, alpha energy. So it's more about understanding your natural traits, not necessarily picking up what's required in that space. I remember when I started, I was just following the alpha energy because I just had men leaders. And
That was the
loud.
blueprint, right?
That was
Yeah.
the blueprint. You have to be loud. You need to have all the answers. You can't say, I don't know. Figure it out. Come, be prepared all the time. Know the answers. Be positive all the time. Know everything's going on. No showing your vulnerability. No crying. Absolutely. If you cry, it is the end of your career.
Mm.
I think that shifted a bit. The good news is because I flopped big time following that blueprint, where I reached in the
Yeah, and I think sometimes, well, I'm going to speak to me because that's the only person I'm really entitled to speak about. But that approach for me led me to burnout. I was like, this is actually, I'm disconnecting from my true self and the flow, my internal flow. I started to disconnect from that by trying to follow this kind of set path that really threw me out energetically.
Absolutely. And if it
Mm.
does that, it's serving nobody. No organization, yourself, your partner, your kids, it serves nobody. I feel what we can do is firstly identify what's your natural trait. And there is no good bad. There's enough science out there. You go through many psychometric tools. They won't say that this style is the best leadership style. The
Mm.
best leadership style for anyone, men, woman, any gender, is flexing and adaptability. And that's why I said emotional intelligence, because your style, whether it's communication, you don't need to be a leader, whether you're communicating or whoever you want to influence, you need to see who that person is, adapt to their style. So if you're
Mm.
going to an alpha who wants one, two, three bullet points and you're a storyteller, I can sit here and say, no, be authentic self. But you don't want to flourish. You have to adapt to the person you're trying to influence. So you go one, two, three with them and go
Mm.
quick. And you go to a storyteller and you just give him one, two, three, and that's it, the top line. Or somebody who's a people person, influencer who loves to connect with you, they're going to feel excluded. They're going to feel cold and rejected. So that's the kind of work we do is around one, identify your style so you know naturally you won't go in that style in most times,
Mm.
especially in times of pressure. Because in times of pressure is where you want to get the most from people and influence them the most. That's the time you can't afford to get into your natural style. You need to see the people that you're talking to and pick up those skills and pick up those cues and give them what you and meet them where they are so that you're able to influence.
So I'd love to touch on another area that you provide training on at TransforMe, and that is the area of diversity and inclusion. Now, I think it's fair to say that we've seen a lot of progress here in the last decade, which is amazing. However, I think for some, I'm not going to say all, but for some organizations, there can be a tendency to see diversity and inclusion or even gender equality as a checklist, as a process, as a quota, as opposed to something that is deeply integrated and embedded within the culture and where individuals don't just talk about the checklist, they're actively doing the thing. What has been your experience about this gap?
Yeah. Uh, I know a lot of people talk about tokenism and checklist. For me, I feel that's a first step.
Yeah.
Even if you start with
Yeah, it's still progress.
it's still progress.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. When it's bad is when you just stop there
Yeah.
and you don't do anything, you don't move ahead. So it's great. Everyone's talking about diversity, inclusion. I, as an organization, not doing anything else. There's a FOMO happening. What do? I don't have the experts. I don't have the budget for experts. Let me just download a checklist from Google, ChatGPT, at least start that. As long as that's step one and not the only step, it's fine because you do that first. It's not ideal, but that's a good step one. You figure out where you are. Hopefully, it'll give you an as is, a diagnostics. You figure out what you don't have, and then slowly move on to the next step. Because it's all about also budgets, right? So people are looking at budgets and investment and how does diversity rank in my priorities? And again, we've got enough and more data and science to show the more you invest in diversity inclusion, the more profitable your organization goes because of the unique ideas and the psychological safety that you provide. But once you do that, there has to be some progress from the tokenism. There has to be some progress from the checklist. And that's when the inside work happens. So you start with the outside work, which is your checklist. The inside work is where, like I said, it's like an iceberg, right? On the tip is your checklist. The deep work is what's under the water. That's going to create the shift. If you just do the checklist and tokenism and say, hey, you had stats saying that if I have an inclusive work, we'll get results. No, you don't get results with that. You get results with what's under the iceberg, the values, the sense of safety, the sense of vulnerability where people are able to say anything and still not feel they'll be impacted. So making inclusion real, not necessarily having an inclusion policy in your recruitment or in your values, but making inclusion real. So I would say how you focus the gaps is, and I know some people say if you're othering them, if you're calling out the differences, are you
Then perpetuating the problem.
yeah, and are
Yeah.
you kind of extending the gap? It's the same thing when you say, why do you have a women leadership program? Why can't you have a gender neutral leadership program? You're even removing women and you're trying to include them. Where is the unity happening? I think, firstly, you need to bring things out in a safe space for people to know. Like I gave an example, a lot of men didn't know that they were implicit biases happening. So a lot of us, including me, don't know what is true diversity. What are things that I'm saying that could,
So
exclude.
true. And I think it becomes scary for people because even if they have good intent and want to do the right thing, there's a fear that, well, what if I don't? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I just don't know what I don't know when I step on someone's toe, even though I meant to do the right thing? Like, I think there is a palpable fear because people do care.
Yeah.
Ultimately, people are good and they do care.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I came to Australia first time and they would look at me and said, where are you from? And I would say India. And they said, really? Because your English is so good. And so I come from the background, which is I'm doing this work, so I understand the intention is to, include me. But a lot of my friends from the same region felt excluded. So what did you expect if I didn't have good English? Did you expect me to come from a village? Did you expect me from because I'm underdeveloped? So there are a lot of stories that they come up with because they've gone through all of those traumas. So it's careful. And I think the best way, and people ask me, how do I address it? There's so many questions, gender, how do we address somebody's gender? Do we ask them? Should we not ask them? And etc. I should just be vulnerable about it. Say, I'm new. I'm just learning about this. I don't have a gender neutral friend. I'm sorry if I come across that, but I'm having this. I'm wondering if you'd be love to be included in it or you'd help me. And just putting your cards out there, being vulnerable, saying, I don't know if I'm saying the right thing. And if I'm not saying the right thing, please call me out. But I want to move on. That's the best way how you can. Otherwise, people are in that the sticky toes. Let me not say anything because if I say something, I will hurt them. But you're also still excluding by not saying. So that's one way that we talk about how do you encourage getting into a territory where you don't know. Is just have that flag. I'm new. I don't know. I'm going to make mistakes. Help me know you a little better and then go from there.
It's such a useful toolkit. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, because I think and I think overall for all of us, it's just that call again to, you've said it, embrace a more authentic version of who we are, to say, hey, I'm not really sure what I'm doing right here, and to be vulnerable about that, because the more we can do that and the more we can give those parts of ourselves, the closer we are to the unity that we're seeking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
And also, I wanted to mention one thing because one of my colleagues in my earlier years, he was visually impaired. And this was way before diversity, etc., about 15 years ago when I used to work with him. And I was so blind that I was the one who was so blind. We were sitting in a data center and there were a lot of switches there. And I would tell him, okay, just put on the red switch. And then it would hit me later on that he wouldn't be able to see the colors. But he was such a champion that he who would just go and be one of us. So
mm,
while we are trying to be on these tippy toes and being very careful about having these conversations, my invitation is also to embrace them like one of us and make mistakes. Like I would say, oh my God, look at me. I'm telling you, switch on the red light. And it's so silly. So just they don't want to be treated in a delicate way. They want to be included, including women as well. When you're having those conversations, you don't need to check 3, 4 times with women. Are you comfortable? Are you okay? For anyone. So just kind of one, embrace them in how you would embrace another colleague. Number two is just go full in there with all authenticity. So I'm going to make mistakes. And if I have something, I love to joke, for example, I may say something that may hurt. I want you definitely to call me out because I want to get better at it and move in that direction.
love that. So, regardless of whether we're talking about vulnerability, whether we're talking about what it takes to become more adaptable, more emotionally intelligent human beings, it all comes down to one thing, and that is our ability to influence. Firstly, to be able to influence ourselves. I think it's influence is something that, like purpose, is an inside job. It also relates to our ability to influence the people around us, and more broadly speaking, our ability to influence an idea so that we can scale that and create impact in the world. Given your expertise in the space of influence and storytelling, what is the most significant insight, wisdom, piece of learning that you now share with the people that you work with regards to how we go about igniting influence in our lives?
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful question because we are influencing all the time, right? As partners, as professionals, when you're trying to sell, when you're trying to buy, influencing is there in every part of our lives. And storytelling is a very powerful medium to do that. In fact, my partner Gatik Chojo does a lot of work on storytelling. He coaches leaders on how to use storytelling to inspire, connect, and influence people. So these are the three things that you can use storytelling for, because influence is about connecting. And what better ways to connect people is through stories. And it's age old, it's old Stone Age stories. People have been connecting with each other through stories. That was, I think, the first tool people ever discovered or used to influence people is through stories.
Mm,
Because I think the basic thing about stories is that it humanizes transactional things. It humanizes people. It gets people together. They feel you. And when people start feeling you, they start including you into themselves, into their lives, into their stories, and including themselves in their trust circle. So storytelling gets very powerful. In fact, there's a very famous book by Robert Cialdini on influence itself,
yeah.
or if I'm not mistaken. He says people like people who are like them. And how do you make people like them is through your own stories. So like I connected with you through your story of your
Mm,
purpose. That's one thing that sat with me right now in this conversation we had so far is like Rebecca really loves to bring purpose out. And I like her because of that story of yours. And similarly, that's how people look into each other's lives, how it may, and stories also makes it authentic and real, not built up, not a future that you are projecting, not a story ahead that you're giving. You're talking about something that's been there. And failure, and the other bit about stories is you can share failures that can be inspirational. And you can stitch that to inspire people. You can stitch your own failure to get people closer to you, and then eventually help them influence the message that you're trying to give. Yeah, there are a lot about storytelling that can create an impact.
Yeah, I think stories are truly a beautiful currency that allow us to see each other, to really build that empathy. Because in your story, I find just a piece of myself, one little part of your story that might allow some piece of the puzzle to fall into place in my world. And so in that sense, I think, storytelling is something that truly and deeply binds us. Sandra, I'd love to move on to our second last question today. And really what I want to talk about with you is what I think is a truly exciting intersection, and that is the intersection between AI and human potential. To frame that up, we're now at a point where, whilst for, much of the last 100 years, probably more, human beings have really identified themselves with their intellect, as in, I think, therefore I am. We're now at a point where AI can really replace a lot of those things that we have built our self-worth upon. And I think that in some ways that leads us to a bit of fear, a little bit of an identity crisis of, well, if AI can do all the things, then who am I now? Yet at the same time, it kind of opens up this amazing space to kind of go, well, who can we be? What's next? If we don't have to do all these things, how else can we identify ourselves? And so I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are in relation to the evolution of human potential in response to the emergence of AI.
Yeah, I'd like to shift that I think, therefore I am, to I feel, therefore I am. And I think, because you're right, AI and technology can do a lot of other work and could probably free 50% of our time. That could also scare us, because what are we meant to do? Or give us a lot of joy. Man, I have so much time to discover myself, to add new skills, to do things. And if you are on the bucket and not sure if in the fence what's better, my invitation would, you just go in the space of, you have so much more time and discover, because this is happening anyways. You have no control over it. So let's not fear it and embrace it and ride it. Ride it like a horse. You brought the horse over there. I keep telling my team, AI is a horse. It is faster than you. So don't think of competing with it. You be
I
the
love
horse.
that analogy. That's a beautiful analogy. Yeah, learn how to ride the horse.
Learn how to ride the horse, and you direct AI wherever you want with the speed that is going to take you to that journey that you want to do. So, but to be the horse, you need to have those skills. Firstly, you need to have the skills of creativity, right? So now this has come. What do I do next? So find what's your next, what's that innovation, whether it's a new skill or a new purpose that you want to take, and how do we want to use that using this great, fast horse that you have with you. I think the second bit is, and it's going a little existential, and if you have read the book called Mindsight from Daniel Siegel, he talks about the mind is a transcendental world. And it's not, and that's why that's one of our differentiators in terms of species as well. We just don't have a brain that protects us. We have a mind, which is very different. It's a world of thought and feeling and attitude and belief and imagination that drives us, and that helps us evolve, and that's how we evolve. Who's created AI, by the way? It's us, our mind, that's created it. So what's next? It's a flow of energy. So what Daniel says, it's a flow of energy and information. And what you do with that energy and information is what evolves you, what takes you to the next level, and that what makes you the best species there is on this planet. And what do you do with the information that, say, for example, this beautiful new technology is bringing for us? Is you put meaning to it. So you can get all the knowledge and information right on the snap of your fingers. But what you can do is put meaning to it and make it even larger, make it beautiful, make it sustainable, put a signature of it, shift the world, create a dent in the universe, in Steve Jobs' language. So that's what we can do. So if we just look and move in that direction, saying, okay, I've had this opportunity, I have a great tool, I can ride it. What's the meaning I want to put for myself? And then align it to it. And life's beautiful from there.
I love that. Sandra, I've come to my last question, and it is simply this. If you had access to the world's biggest billboard and you could share one word or phrase, what would you say and why?
I'm going to be biased to what I do day in and day out. So it's more about purpose and finding yourself. So this is what I'm going to put out. I'm going to put out that don't be limited with what you know about yourself, but be an explorer and find the treasures within. So when you move in that direction, so that's a one statement I want to put, that if you move in that direction, your life is limitless. And there's so much already within you that is just enough to take you lifetimes, not just this life, but many lives. So don't be limited. Go ahead and unleash yourself.
Well, I, and I'm sure many of our listeners today are incredibly grateful that you have done that work of finding your own treasure, because you've been able to share with us so much today, so many tools, so much insight. It's been just such a joy to spend this time with you and to get to know you and to really tap in to the well of wisdom that is within you. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who would love to learn more about you, more about your work. Where can they find you?
So I'm on Insta, LinkedIn, Sandra Colhando. I'll put that down, SandraColhando. Otherwise, for work, you can get into TransforMeLearning.com. There we can help you with a lot of work. There's a lot of resources as well to help you find what you want to do. A lot of skill sets to pick up from there. So these are my two big areas, spaces that you can find me. And yeah, I think if you were able to take the courage and just move towards what you dream for, aspire for, purpose will follow you. So keep it simple. Just find out what you want to do, where time flows and you're just enjoying what you're doing. And there's beauty at the end of it. Everything falls in place.
Sandra, thank you so much for joining me on the DNA of Purpose podcast.
Thank you, Rebecca. I had so much fun.